culture. I am your host, Michael Liebowitz, and I'm here today all by my lonesome. The wonderful Persephone will be back mañana, tomorrow. So I just thought that today I'd go over a little bit of this book here. This is my original copy of The Criminal Personality. So Persephone and I have been discussing the book Inside the Criminal Mind by Dr. Samenow. But their earlier work, he and a guy named Dr. Samuel Yochelson was, let me make sure I'm going live over here. I am, repost. Was The Criminal Personality. It was a 3-volume set. And it was a great set. And reading it, again, was like I was reading a blueprint to my thinking. And I'm just going over, I'm looking through this book right now, and one of the first things I come to, it says, no matter how many crimes he has committed, the criminal regards himself as a good person. Now, as Persephone and I have discussed, that's very true. Is most people, I think, do consider themselves good people, but the criminal has an abundance of evidence that he is indeed not a good person, but nevertheless thinks he is. Now, so the doctors, Samenow and Yochelson, Dr. Yochelson worked on this from 1971 to 1975. So you're talking about 14 years studying criminals. But Dr. Yochelson died in 1975, and Dr. Samenow continued the research. You're talking about, hundreds and hundreds of criminals. You're talking about their family members, their friends, the people that supervise them. And they came up with 52 thinking errors. And I just thought that, maybe I would just go over a couple of them. And it's important to know that when these doctors started, when Dr. Yochelson started, he did not view criminals the way he ended up viewing them. It took a long time and a lot of dealing with them for him to figure out the type of people with which he was dealing. So you've got the first principle they put out there is the continuum of criminality. And the reason they put out the continuum is because they want people to understand that most people at a given time will engage in the types of thinking that they're talking about. But the criminals are on the far end, extreme end of doing these, both in terms of degree and frequency of these criminal thinking errors. So if you hear any in here and they sound like you, just know that you probably are not a criminal. So the first criminal thinking pattern that they identify is energy, that criminals have an abundance of energy, but that energy is directed toward what criminals want to do, right? It's not energy toward responsible living. It's not energy toward taking care of their children, getting a job, paying the bills. It's energy toward criminal enterprises. Also, fear. And criminals fear what the doctors call the put down, of people putting them down, of people calling attention to their flaws, because when that happens, they take it as a severe attack on their very core, their very essence. And they can go into what the doctors call the zero state, where us criminals will feel like we are nothing, like we are the worst of the worst. We're just terrible. And when that happens, we enter into an extreme anger state. It's a violation of what the doctors call pride. The criminal pride is different from pride, and other things. It's pride in doing the wrong things. And it's also the sense that, how do I put it? It's really an insecurity that we're talking about. It's pseudo pride, right? And when you attack that, you put the criminal down, and the criminal goes, it's violated, goes into the zero state, and the response is anger, and extreme anger, and then what the doctors call power thrusting. It means that you are going to assert your dominance over other people, attempt to control other people in an attempt to come out of that zero state and restore yourself to the feeling of the all powerful, unique person that criminals think they are. The doctor's also another one, and we talked about this with Persephone, is sentimentality. Criminals can be very sentimental people, man. Feel bad for animals, feel bad for old ladies, watching television, maybe shedding tears over a sad movie like Old Yeller. Uh, and the criminal uses that sentimentality to fuel his thoughts of himself as a good person. I certainly did, right? I used the good qualities that I had, and they were real. Um, but I would use them and say, this is the real me. The robberies, the assaults, the insults that I lob at other people, the demeaning way I treat women, that's not the real me. The real me is the guy that holds the door for the old lady that says please and thank you. That's the real me. That's how criminals think, right? They have to uphold a view of themselves as a good person. Otherwise, they would have to change because they would be reduced to this zero state. The doctors also talk about how criminals use religion. And when criminals, by and large, get involved in religion, it's not in an attempt to actually use the religion as a way to change their moral framework, to change the way that they're behaving. Not that they don't put on the facade that that's what's happening, but by and large, you'll see that the criminal thinking is now applied to religion in terms of being dogmatic and trying to assert their will over other people, to convert people to their religion, or they'll use their religion for manipulation purposes, to go to the extra services, to pass things around. The bottom line is religion has a very poor history of actually leading to the types of thinking changes that the doctors talk about. They actually talk about invading the inner man, of getting in, really penetrating to the core of who the criminal is and getting him to fundamentally alter the way that he thinks, the way that he views the world. And they talk about criminal going from total irresponsibility to total integrity and not allowing even one lie from the criminal. What I mean by dogmatic is exactly what it means. It means taking things arbitrarily on faith, not listening to opposing arguments, not being open to reason. That's what I mean by dogmatic. So they talk about, like I said, invading the inner man. You've got to get the criminal to completely change his character to the point that not even one moral infraction is acceptable. They go on to concrete thinking, right? The concrete thinking, meaning criminals do not think in principle, don't think in terms of abstractions, don't understand such things as morality and rights. It's all about what's happening in the here and now, the immediate gratification. Then they go on to talk about fragmentation. And I really, ultimately you need to go and read about this stuff because I'm not going to do it justice here. I just want to give you kind of an introduction to understand what I was exposed to as a blueprint for my thinking and what really helped me to alter who I was and to become a good human being. And I am a good human being today. I can say that with confidence. I'm a person of integrity. But the fragmentation is criminals will start something and then quit. They'll be thinking about something and then move on to something else very quickly. There's very little focus in their lives. Uniqueness, the next two are uniqueness and perfectionism, criminal perfectionism. The criminal views himself as somebody that is unique, that is one of a kind, that nobody else can understand, that he's experienced things that nobody else has. Nobody else has gone through what he's gone through. And the perfectionism is he has to be the best at everything. If he's not the best at everything, he's a complete failure. And then we go back to the zero state that I talked about earlier. The doctors also talk about criminal suggestibility, that it's not peer pressure in the sense of I feel I'm pressured to do this or that, and that's going to make me do something that's completely foreign to me. It's suggestibility in regard to criminal behavior, that if you talk about doing a specific type of crime or engaging in activity, the criminal is very suggestible toward those ends. Note, the criminal is not suggestible toward living a responsible life. He's suggestible toward doing what he ought not to be doing. Also, criminals can be loners. They want to be seen as, all on their own, not accountable to anybody, not responsible to anybody else. Sexuality, we talked about this the other day, where criminals use sexuality. The criminals feel like they have to be the best lover, the most attractive guy, the one that all the women want, and they think of sexuality in terms of exploitation, not in terms of having a comforting relationship with somebody else. Lying, criminals lie as easily as they breathe. It's frequent and it's extreme. I would say they even lie to themselves. So they talk about the automatic errors of thinking, and they talk about the closed channel. So what the closed channel is that the criminal refuses to receive critical feedback and refuses to open up to others about what he's thinking. In order for criminals to change, the channel has to be open. The criminal has to be willing to share things about himself and willing to take feedback. I want to go, let me try to find this here real quickly, because I think if I can find exactly what they say, I think it's important. And they also, let me go back up a little bit. By thinking errors, they say, we mean the mental processes required by the criminal to live his kind of life. So that's very very true. These are the operative ways of thinking that have criminals behaving the way they do. And they also say, in our program for change, responsibility is defined as the outcome of implementing thinking patterns that are corrective of all the thinking errors described here. Those are in the next chapter, in the next book rather. It's actually, they deal with the change process and what needs to be done. An open channel has three components: disclosure, receptivity, and self-criticism. So yes, in order for a criminal to change, they have to disclose, they have to be receptive, and they have to be willing to criticize themselves, which, let me tell you, is an extremely difficult and painful process. Extremely. Criminals have the tendency to say, I can't, when they mean I don't want to and I won't do it. So, can you do this job? No, I can't do it. Can you pick me up at a certain time? I can't, when it's really I won't. There's this book I want you to read. It'll really help you. I can't make it through it. It's always I can't, when what is meant is I won't. Also, as an aside, criminals have a very difficult time distinguishing between what they want and what they need and what they are entitled to. The victim stance, we talked about that. Criminals see themselves as victims, not as victimizers. A lot of the time, it's just used as an excuse and a manipulation tactic, but criminals also come to believe that they are the victims and see themselves as victims. Lack of time perspective. Yes, criminals are range of the moment thinkers. A large part due to the concrete thinking, immediate gratification. I want what I want, when I want it. Therefore, I'm entitled to have it. The failure to put oneself in another's position, failure to consider injury to others. Basically, lack of empathy. The doctors don't like to put it in terms of empathy, but that's what you're talking about, is criminals don't see things from the perspective of other people. It's all about what I want, when I want it. Your needs and wants don't matter. My rights supervene everything. My rights are all encompassing, and yours are simply not. Failure to assume obligation and failure to assume responsible initiatives. Yes, criminals do not want to commit to anything. They don't want to commit to anybody. They don't want to, certainly don't want to commit to being responsible. Criminals loathe the idea of having to show up, for instance, to work every day, or to their meeting every day. Whatever it might be, they do not want to do it. Ownership here. Ownership, basically, we talked about this also, the idea that they own everything and everybody when they walk into whatever room they happen to go into. Now, this is not explicit. No criminal says, wow, I own that computer, I own that cup, I own that book. What the criminal does think is, if I want it, I have the right to take it, and I will do so, which amounts to the idea that they own everything. Fear of fear. Criminals feel like if they're scared of something, then they are a nothing, the zero state. I cannot be afraid of anything at any time. I have to be the all-powerful, number one gangster, basically. Lack of trust. Of course, criminals don't trust others because they know from experience that they aren't trustworthy, so they don't trust other people. Very, very may show themselves to be paranoid, but at the same time, they also know with all the wrong they're doing that trusting people is maybe not a good idea to, open up and tell people about the crimes they've committed. Criminals refuse to be dependent on anybody else. And this is not independence in the sense of being a producer, of being a creator, of being responsible. As next one is lack of interest in responsible performance. It's not that type of dependence that they fear. It's the idea that they, somebody else is helping them with anything, or that somebody else is teaching them something. They don't want to have to be dependent on anybody else ever for anything. Pretentiousness. Yes, criminals are extremely pretentious in the sense that they will pretend to be smarter than they are, wiser than they are, stronger, faster. The criminal he's the great businessman, he's the great basketball player, he's great at everything. This one is very important. Failure to make an effort or endure adversity. Criminals do not want to be uncomfortable for a second, which is why many, of course, use drugs or other escape mechanisms. You're in the cell, you got to be playing Game Boy, watching television, listening to the radio, talking to guys outside the cell, anything but actually experience the discomfort of your own life, the discomfort of being in that cell, the discomfort of being a criminal. The discomfort of facing who you are in order to change. Criminals simply do not want to do that ever. Poor decision making, obviously. I mean, they're criminals, they're in prison, so of course they're going to be making poor decisions, so they have to learn what decisions are good. Now, if you think about it in terms of their fragmentation, their concrete thinking, their unwillingness to endure adversity, of course then they're going to be making bad decisions, and when you tie that to the energy they have, the criminal suggestibility, you can see how they end up doing bad things. All these thinking patterns ultimately go together. They're interconnected. And that's what the doctors mean when they say these are the thinking patterns that allow people to commit criminal behaviors. So they talk about corrosion and cutoff. So what that means is that if you, for instance, I've told the story about how when I was 14 years old, I committed an assault and a robbery, and I went home and I felt so bad about it. I felt so guilty, and I pushed it out of my head. What the doctors would say is I cut that off. I cut it off so I wouldn't have to deal with that guilt. Criminals can also cut off fear. So if I'm afraid to fight, if I'm afraid to do a robbery, afraid to do a murder, whatever, that's in there, and I can, like they say, it's like cutting it off with a scalpel. that you just cut it off and eliminate all those deterrents. So you might have the deterrent of fear you're going to get caught, fear your mother's going to be upset, fear of this, fear of that, whatever, and you cut it off in order to allow yourself to do what you want to do. Cut off the guilt, the anticipated guilt that you might feel. You cut that all off in order to do the bad things. Building up the opinion of oneself as a good person. Yes, we've talked about that. Super optimism. Criminals can convince themselves that they will get away with anything. I know I did it, as I talked about the other day. I actually, when I went to prison, the prison psychologist in my assessment read my high school psychologist's opinion of me. And the high school psychologist said, Michael continues to engage in criminal activity, believes he will not get caught. And of course, I was in prison facing, at that point, 90 years in prison. So, or 84, whatever, I don't remember the exact number, but decade upon decade upon decade. And I was like, wow, I thought I would never get caught. And that's part of the, that's part of what criminals do, is they convince themselves they're going to get away with everything. Criminals celebrate after the crime. They talk about that. So they also talk about non-arrestable phases in the criminal. And one of the things they talk about is the criminal equivalence. So criminals might be disregarding the rights of other people, but not breaking the law. So they might just be showing lack of manners, lack of consideration, being rude, that sort of thing. And these are indicative of the criminal mind, the criminal thinking. So I just wanted to go through those very quickly. But again, you can look them up online. Maybe if Persephone's watching, she can download them off the, that thing they call the internet and share them on the website. That would be fantastic. But criminals think and act differently than other people. Now, sometimes people may say, well, take a pessimistic view. I don't, because I know criminals can change, because I did it. I know people who have done it. It takes a ton of effort. The doctor said they know of no task in human psychology that's more difficult. So then they, in this next book, it's called the Volume 2, The Change Process, and they talk about how they soon learned that criminals were feeding us what they thought we wanted to hear. That's absolutely, yes. If you can find all of them, Persephone, all the criminal thinking patterns, and share them to the website, that would be fantastic. In addition to the articles that I sent you the last 2 days. Okay, I want more than the 10 though, Persephone, because the 10 are in the Patreon, but now we're talking about all of them. So if you can find them all and share them, that would be great. They talk about that the approach is a rational one. It's similar to reality therapy of William Glasser or Albert Ellis. There's a lot of components that are indicative of cognitive behavioral therapy. They say to change requires a responsible choice. They do a lot of focusing on choice, that criminals are free to choose to continue in their criminal activity, or they're free to undergo the very difficult task of change. They say here they have exercises in self-disgust. You're not going to do it, Persephone? Okay, I respect the no and I accept it. So the people in the audience, you can look these up online. Criminal Thinking Errors, Doctors Samenow and Yochelson. So, yeah. But, no, not right now. I wasn't saying she do it right now. But if she can't do it at all, that's okay too. So they say, we do not build the criminal's self-esteem. Instead, we hold a mirror up to him for him to see himself as he is. Having truly realized what he is, he requires self-respect only after he implements new patterns in the responsible world. Now, importantly, people use the term self-esteem in a different way. What they're talking about is not having self-confidence, realistic self-confidence and self-respect. They don't want the criminal to have a false sense of who he is, view of himself as a good person, feel good about himself. They want the criminal to actually implement the correctives to the thinking errors to become a good person so that the criminal can have realistic self-respect and self-esteem, although they don't use the term self-esteem. There's a lot of things in here that I do want to share from this book. So criminals are intolerant of others' shortcomings and reacts angrily when anyone finds fault with him. Absolutely true. I mean, if you can see all the underlying, I mean, every page in this book is underlined like that with notes upon notes upon notes upon notes. They talk about power and control are so pervasive and automatic in the criminal's functioning that he is often unaware of their prominence in almost every thought and act. It's essential for criminals to remain alert to the use to which he puts his personality assets. Criminals have to discriminate between the power that comes from legitimately through achievement and the power derived from irresponsible self-aggrandizement at the expense of others. This is just remarkable work. It's criminals have to learn there's no statute of limitation with respect to the consequences of past criminality. Absolutely. Abso-freaking-lutely. Unjust suspicions are to be expected. Yes, the criminal's history cannot be easily erased. I agree with that, by the way. Let me just keep going here. Criminal find the job. Dennis Prager says serial killers have self-esteem. Yeah, the difference between his understanding of self-esteem and mine are extreme. I view it very differently. Criminals have to anticipate what they will face each day. Criminals have to learn, this is key here, criminals have to learn to act in their own responsible self-interest. And at no time can a criminal compromise his integrity. He is expected to function with honesty, even if others around him are not doing so. There are to be no white lies, no taking sick leave unless he is genuinely incapacitated, no phony excuses for anything. Now, this was the doctor's work that was based on, decades of research, at this point, a decade and a half, of dealing with criminals. And when I attempted to implement this in prison, I was often told about how I was being too rigid. And the staff in prison would try to apply the traditional framework of psychology that had absolutely no relation to criminals or how criminals behaved. And the doctors say what would be an isolated instance of irresponsibility for one person is likely to open the door to continuing irresponsibility and arrestability for the criminal. The criminal has to make continual appraisals if he has developed relationships that offer him the greatest potential for growth. That's absolutely correct. There's a particular quote that I want to find here. Most important is the inner freedom that derives from the effective, sustained operation of conscience. That's true. Our criteria of change go far beyond crimelessness and holding a job. Often a criminal in our program has received praise from others, but severe criticism from us. The key indicator that change is taking place is implementation of new patterns of thought and action, both in our office and outside. The criminal's attitude as he participates in group discussion is another clue. Let me see. There's a quote I really want. Criminals want nothing to do with other criminals. The changed criminal wants nothing to do with criminals. I agree. Major indicators of change are the elimination of anger reactions, the abdication of control, and the elimination of power thrusts. See, I still struggle with anger, and this is an interesting thing. Wow, this is a trip down memory lane. It says, when adversities arise, the changing criminal does not blame others and no longer presents himself as a victim. He does not complain about the strains of daily living, but endures them and patiently looks for ways to overcome them constructively. In change, the criminal blames only himself if he fails to do something well and falls short of excellence. In the side thing here, I wrote, "Man up, Mikey, stop whining," as a note to myself. If I don't find this, criminals have to eliminate all vestiges of criminal thinking. We have been extreme in our insistence on total elimination of criminal thinking and action. That is, we have warned that the least irresponsibility is the crack in the door that will eventually result in criminals being confined. The changed criminal despise what they were and fear the possibility that if they are not watchful of themselves, they will revert to former patterns. In the margins, Brent wrote key because, of course, he knew it. Okay, I can't find the quote. The quote basically was that if a criminal was presenting himself as a victim and seemed sad, they would tell the criminal he didn't even have the guts to cry. They would insist that he view himself as not a good person, and that you really wanted to invoke guilt in that criminal. I can attest, having read both volumes, or all three actually, volumes of The Criminal Personality and much of Samonow's work, that while there's some things that I disagree with, by and large they were right. They were correct in their assessment of the criminal. And it's important. I do think criminals can change, and I don't put all the onus. Well, criminals have to take the individual responsibility to change. I'm 100% convinced of that. It's the responsibility of criminals to become better people. At the same time, from a perspective of the individuals living in society, the individuals who pay the taxes, the individuals who fund the prison system, it is in their interest to have a better correctional system, a correctional system that actually implements evidence-based practices to change the behavior of criminals, in other words, to rehabilitate them. There's evidence about what works. There's evidence about the type of system that works, and that's what needs to be implemented. And with that, I'm going to end this day's episode of Crime, Corrections, and Culture. We will be back tomorrow. Hopefully, Persephone will be back with me. Thank you, everybody, for joining. See you tomorrow. Have a good day.